Okay, colleagues, greetings and welcome back. I gotta be careful with this bell. It's sometimes very jarring if I put it too close to the microphone. So apologies, this stream is unscheduled. I'm gonna try to schedule the streams in the future. Man, at this stage, I'm trying to figure out my schedule, trying to figure out the devices yet. So apologies. Kind of what's important, like from experience, my experience tells me that what's really important in the long run is consistency. So, we're going to begin like this, slightly chaotic, and then hopefully we're going to gain steam. So, I have a lot of things on my mind. Actually, I have a lot of things on my mind all the time. I'm not sure if it's actually such a good idea. And kind of one of my big preoccupations is how my Buddhist tendencies and my yogic tendencies, how they pull me in very different direction from my kind of role or job as a teacher of Western philosophy. So somebody like the Buddha would, I think, urge us, all of us, to emphasize perhaps different problems, different solutions, and kind of I want to be very open to that. I did a video recently about Buddhism and Marxism on wisdom of age, and I do feel that kind of within the spiritual traditions there's a very different attitude towards kind of life in general and different kinds of expectations. Again, in major religious traditions, not always. I mean, you also have this kind of immediate expectation of eschatology, the end of the world, some kind of end and rebirth. Some early Christians definitely, this phrase about this generation shall not pass away. So some people within the generation of Jesus expected the second coming and the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven in some kind of very kind of obvious, vivid, material transformation of the actual existing like fleshly world around them. We have, like this is well attested in the record. So, sometimes spiritual traditions await this kind of transformation on a large scale for everybody. And they wait it on very kind of, again, short time scales, like in a sense like this is going to happen immediately. But I tend to think that this is probably more of an exception than a rule, and most philosophical, theological traditions have had kind of longer expectations that, and I mean like in general, so I mean the way I titled this talk is Left Conservatism, and I do want to talk about conservatism, and I do want to talk about pessimism. In connection with leftism and with Marxism, because I think the way I see Marx is actually as a pessimistic, conservative thinker. I think there are very serious, underappreciated strands in Marx, and if we're looking to expand more on Marx's conservatism, we need to look at Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, because Hegel and Rousseau are both much more explicitly conservative and pessimistic. Well, especially Rousseau, very pessimistic, as opposed to Marx. By the way, one of the lectures, I'm not very happy with my lecture on Marx, but I am fairly happy with my lecture on Rousseau. So that's kind of... I always feel strange recommending my own stuff, but, I tried my best. Students often ask me also about further resources like reading materials that I use. I don't want to talk about this now because this will derail the live stream, but it's like Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press. These tend to be, from my experience, the best books. I'm open to changing my mind. Like, I'm not dogmatic about this, but having studied and taught in the University of London, I gravitate towards these kinds of publishing houses. But students and like I encourage everybody, like in the spirit of free and equal discussion, to look for alternative sources. But my favorites usually tend to come from Oxford and Cambridge University Press. So I titled this talk sort of Conservatism, which is kind of related to pessimism. We'll see how far we get with this. And I started with the discussion of the religious tradition. I can spell this somebody. of religious traditions, especially somebody like Buddha, although it doesn't have to be the Buddha, because what did Lao Tzu in Tao Te Ching, what did he expect? Or again, if you take much of Christian philosophy or Jewish philosophy or Muslim philosophy, there's in general, there's this understanding that, life is hard. Life is hard. Thinking is hard. Seeing the world clearly, thinking is hard. Seeing the world clearly is hard. It's a challenge. Seeing the world clearly is hard. And also, it's living in a good society is hard. Creating, establishing, maintaining a good society. So let me just write, social harmony is hard. And I think, kind of to the best of my understanding, that's, there's a broad consensus about this. At the end of the day, I don't believe that philosophy deals in knockdown arguments. So it's not like I have a knockdown argument for this, but having done philosophy for, on the order of 20 years, professionally, more or less, I have come to the conclusion, or it seems to me that kind of objectively it's true. Life is hard, and unfortunately for vast majority of people, life is not very pleasant. And if we are, again, even this idea of philosophy as a luxury, if we find ourselves in circumstances, in situations where we can afford to do philosophy, that already means probably that we are very, very lucky. And I'm not exactly sure what's the best way to kind of, because it is a challenge, at least on an emotional level, this understanding that you are lucky, whereas most other people probably are not, and kind of, what do you do with that? What's the next step, right? And the least I could say is I think it imposes a certain kind of responsibility on us, or at least let's put it this way, I feel responsibility. The fact that I am lucky enough to be able to do this full-time, think full-time, I think imposes a certain kind of responsibility on me. And this is also kind of another big topic I like to talk about a lot. Well, I don't know. I mean, at some point, perhaps we'll get to the conflict consensus, because that's one of the big conceptual dichotomies I always have to touch upon, almost invariably in any topic I discuss. Yes, but before we get to conflict consensus, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was talking about how life is hard and there's a certain kind of responsibility imposed on us, that thinking is hard. Oh, yeah. This is social and individual. This is related to conflict and consensus. So, and this is going to be my conclusion for today. So I always have this really bad habit of not getting to the conclusion. I always remind myself, Alex, begin with the conclusion. So this is going to be the conclusion. The conclusion is going to be about the individual and the social. And it's a tentative conclusion. And again, I remind you again, my point zero anytime I talk is I am a believer, again, from within the ethics of pedagogy, pedagogical ethics of the University of London. And it's that's also another interesting thing. Thinking and language in general is, I feel, historically, sociologically, is always relevant, always relative. Well, relative is a strong word, but always contingent on the kind of a community. Language doesn't exist in a vacuum. Language is social, and society is historical. So thinking is embedded in language. Language is embedded in society. Society is a product of history. So our act of thinking is always situated. It's always situated, right? And so, so thinking is always situated, and in this sense, it's in some sense not at no time really very well grounded. It always rests on external assumptions with which we find ourselves. Again, a Heideggerian phrase: we find ourselves thrown into this world, and we find ourselves with certain presuppositions, with certain modes of seeing the world, with certain modes of thinking which we don't choose. And I like to compare this to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, although my mathematician friends always cringe whenever I do that. But look at him, that's my layman way of understanding Gödel's incompleteness. In any robust logical system, at least robust enough to support arithmetic, you're going to have statements which are going to be true but not provable. That's one simplified way of talking about Gödel's and computer. But what does it mean? Statements which are true but not provable. Assumptions, I guess. Again, my mathematician friends cringe whenever I talk about this, but, it's an obsessive compulsion of mine. I have to talk about this. So anyway, thinking is always situated. And for me, thinking is situated within the context of the university and of educational system in general. And my pedagogical ethics, and again, I haven't invented them, right? This is the situation which I find. And again, I tend to agree at the end of the day, but I think I also agree secondly. But firstly and primarily, this is the way the university is organized. This kind of standard to which the university aspires. It sometimes falls short, but anyway, could talk about this for a long time. So anyway, so the pedagogical principle is polyphony for the sake of polyphony. So we want people to disagree. So that's always a very important disclaimer. By the way, Nietzsche, I think, called this slave morality in philosophy. Like, what are you, a wimp? You cannot speak in your own voice. You have to always make disclaimers for your point of view. Well, I take Nietzsche's criticism seriously. And it's not just being a wimp. Nietzsche would also say that it's disingenuous, because Nietzsche would say that at the end of the day, what speaks through me is my will to power, is that I'm actually trying to turn you to my own opinion. And all of this song and dance about how actually, no, we're in it for polyphony, for the sake of polyphony, you're always entitled to your opinion, we grow through dialogue, right? All of this, Nietzsche would say, is a smokescreen to just numb the defense mechanisms of the people who are listening to this. I don't know, full disclosure. But I worry about these things. I hope that's not the case. I hope that there's a difference between indoctrination and mutual dialogical learning. I hope that there's this difference. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to be sure, I think. It's like... reminded of the infuriating way in which someone like George Edward Moore spoke. Moore would never say he's sure. He would say, it seems to me that I'm sure. And I'm like, Moore, make up your mind. Does it seem to you, or are you sure? Those are different words. Well, at least I'm consented. I'm never sure of anything. I'm always, it always only seems to me. Anyway, and perhaps Nietzsche is entitled to call me a wimp. We can't, we can't all be perfect, right? gotta acknowledge your weaknesses. So anyway, yes, I'm trying to get to this whole discussion of pessimism, and I'm kind of talking about everything at the same time. And again, it's like this is, in many ways, like these thoughts are kind of marinating in my head. This is not necessarily very well ordered, but that's the thing. It's difficult for me to order my thoughts unless I talk them through. So always, the first take is chaotic, and then hopefully the second or the third take is going to be better. It's like those of you who've listened to my Coursera, which is far from perfect. It's like if I had the energy, I would redo every segment. But it's like some of the takes were take number 7 or 9 or 10 in like years of practice. Like, how many lectures on Hobbes have I given throughout the years? Anyway, but what I, you see, that's the big problem I had. I promised conclusions up front, and I spent, 5 or 10 minutes in complete digression. So the conclusion up front is that I am pessimistic. So conclusion has to do with pessimism, but then individual and collective project. And the idea is the following. I do think that kind of life is hard, and thinking is hard. And if anything, history of philosophy teaches us is that people in the past oftentimes have been woefully wrong. And the smartest people in the past, by any measure, have turned out like their views tend to be inconsistent. Like there's no royal road to philosophy. There's no royal road to truth. Everybody disagrees. There are always problems. I really want to mention at least a sentence about the religious tradition. Well, I could say it immediately, right? Because students often have this. I think the very naive misconception that somehow, science is uncertain, but religion is certain. Or let's say philosophy is uncertain, but religion is certain. But nothing can be further from the truth. And it's like, with all absolute respect towards the vast, body of human religious tradition. And again, I, as a teacher, as a pedagogue, within the ethos of an institution like the University of London, like I talk to students from all around the world of all the different various denominations, Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, all sorts of atheists and agnostics and Buddhists and Hindus and, Japanese practitioners of Shinto, and the list goes on. It's like religions apparently, at least on a surface level, disagree. And it's kind of interesting because when you talk about ecumenical approaches, which seek to say, well, actually all religions are the same. All religions are talking about the same thing. Oftentimes people get very militant, right? And people say, no, that's not true. That's not true. Like my denomination of Christianity gets it right. Everybody else is wrong. They're going to go to hell. I'm absolutely not trying to make fun of this, right? I take these topics very seriously. But that's the thing, again, like since the beginning of serious theology in the West, and I would imagine everywhere, but let's just focus on the West for 1 second. There was this notion that in order to be a good, pious, religious person, you need to engage in philosophy, because otherwise, how can you know what approach to take? And it's like sometimes people say, well, you just have to look at what's popular. Like in some forms of religiosity, there's this idea that people in their totality are incorruptible. Well, no religion has majority today. So it's kind of, popularity is not a very good guide, right? And so, and like in all the major denominations, you have like these schisms and divisions, and you have like millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of people who, according to any worldview, would be misguided or misled, right? And so, like, there's no easy cop out. Kind of, you have like, there's no way around thinking, or at least so it seems to me. And I'm a professional philosopher, so it's a bit of a self-serving conclusion that you cannot get through life without philosophy, or at least like you either have to be super lucky, or you have to do philosophy. It's impossible to be consistently and reliably happy. Well, I tend to think of happiness as some kind of psychic health. This is, I think, how the ancient Greeks thought about happiness. And I don't think it's possible to be reliably happy unless you either have to be extraordinarily lucky to have been born in wonderful circumstances, or you have to do philosophy, because critique is also very important. Because again, worldviews, religions, denominations disagree, and so you have to find like critique in a sense, like you have to have a filter, have a way of filtering through the various competing worldviews. And so I promise to give the conclusion. And the conclusion about this individual and collective stuff is sort of the following, that I think, and I'm going to give a biographical note in a moment here, but I think that there's a good case to be made that we shouldn't really expect society to improve dramatically in the coming years. In fact, I want to say, if I were to teach a course in history, I would say that the last 50 years of approximately since 1970 is a big loss for humanity. When I look around the world, I do not see progress. And perhaps this is my bias. I hope I am wrong. I have many friends who are much more optimistic than I am and who see the world differently. And I pray that they're right. But my perception is when I look at the last 50 years of human history, I see the march of anonymous, faceless, structural forces of global capitalist neoliberalism. And things, on this picture are not getting better. And there's no reason to believe that they're going to get better. And again, since 2008 financial crisis, my world financial crisis, my perception was that, I'm sure different people find themselves in different circumstances, but my own trajectory, kind of what I see in my own trajectory, like me, my friends, my colleagues, we are not on a good timeline. Like in general, since 2008, there's been a huge rollback, and it's a structural rollback. It's a structural rollback, and people can point to a lot of symptoms of this rollback of democracy, rollback of rationality, rollback of progress of all sorts of, like a rollback of optimism, serious challenges to the future of humanity. And it's easier than ever to imagine how humanity will destroy. So I don't mean to be very pessimistic about this. And Nikolai, exactly correctly, I think, likes to make fun of me whenever I go on these pessimistic rants. And granted, this is perhaps a feature of my temperament. And again, at the end of the day, I don't have some kind of stake in pessimism. Like if I'm wrong, excellent, wonderful. I would be like, if you're a pessimist, you're either right or pleasantly surprised. Pleasantly surprised. I really hope to be pleasantly surprised. But still, at the end of the day, so again, especially since 2008, financial crash, I think that there's a lot of things that have become like really worse in terms of level of public dialogue and like in general kind of capacity of humanity to solve problems. I'm hoping this trend perhaps could be reversed, but the problems are structural and systemic, and most people don't pay attention to them. Thinking is hard, and thinking clearly requires a structural view, and people are very bad at structural view. And I think that the biggest problem that we have is that we cannot think structural view, and that we very seriously mistake symptom for cause. And I'm not sure if I want to be specific right now. Perhaps it's like, I don't necessarily, I mean, it doesn't bring me pleasure to engage in these kind of holy wars, culture wars on the internet. But like from the kinds of conversations I've been having, and in general from my perception, is that like what people, like if I asked a random person in the street and I asked them what are the top 10 problems facing humanity, I think that the top 10 problems they would say are probably not the problems that I have in mind, and I would say that all of the problems are just mere symptoms. And if we address the symptoms, like there's a kind of, I think of this in terms of medical, and I mean it very seriously. Like if you have a toothache, it's the ache is the symptom, but the root cause is the decay in the tooth. And so you can take painkillers, anesthetics, in order to not feel the pain. And you're going to treat the symptom, but the root cause is only going to get worse. And that's like, I think that not just mistaking symptoms for causes, but what we're doing is deeply maladaptive, because we're treating symptoms instead of causes. We're treating, as we're treating symptoms, the causes actually become worse. And in fact, well, again, pessimist that I am, I feel that, very often power structures, or like elites, if you want to use that phrase, actually use the crises for their own benefit. And again, like, this could sound conspiratorial, but there should be nothing conspiratorial about this. Like, fellow Marxists, and I'm not a dogmatic Marxist, and in fact, I feel I should stop calling myself a Marxist because people misunderstand, and that kind of, I don't mean to start these wars or anything. I mean intellectual battles, because again, kind of most people don't understand what Marxism is, including most people who call themselves Marxists, which is a very bold assertion on my part. But that's the story of my life. I feel that I've always been intellectually in the minority. Like, and 20 years, I tried my best, and I don't do this. I don't think, or at least I don't think I do this out of some kind of spirit of contrarianism. Like, I'm not trying to be contrarian for the sake of contrarian. I think it's just because thinking is hard. Most people are malinformed. That's the way it is. Like, you don't expect a person in the street to be an expert in medicine. In the same fashion, there's no reason to expect a person in the street to be an expert in philosophy or social theory, because this is hard stuff. And again, within my view of philosophy of science, of natural and social sciences are much harder than natural sciences. And like even biology already, including medicine, is much harder than physics. And by the way, yeah, so having also these discussions about scientism, right? And I want to say that it's this long separate discussion for another day. I do feel that perhaps some of my takes in the past, including on the channel, have been a little too scientistic. But at the end of the day, I do feel that kind of the best way to approach scientism, or kind of in general, kind of like from the standpoint of philosophy of science, the edifice of science, this physicalistic model from protons to presidents, from electrons to elections. The best way to approach it is to try to push the explanations that we have as far as we can, and then we will see how, philosophy of physics, like physics, shows its own limitations. How, good philosophy of physics, we will see that Our best models, like lambda CDM concordance cosmology, at best explains 5% of what goes on in the sky. In fact, less than 5%, fewer than 5%, right? So, like physics shows limitations of physics. Biology shows limitations of biology. Medicine shows the limitation of medicine. Like, you don't really need to go very much beyond. And in fact, like, whenever people talk about going beyond, again, I've been looking for 20 years, and I'm not sure I found a very good alternative to empiricism. I still feel a deep commitment to empiricism. But anyway, I kind of keep talking about everything at the same time, which is my usual modus operandi. But what I've been trying to let me just finish this line of thought about pessimism. And the line of thought about pessimism is that, again, I don't see much cause for optimism, unfortunately. And my solution, my own personal solution, and this is kind of, it's very important for me to kind of, before I record anything, to kind of in my own head understand what the hell am I doing, like, with myself. And like, obviously, these recordings that I make, the lectures that I make, the classes that I teach, they're not going to have a huge impact on the history of humanity. No way. There's this phrase in Marx, and I talked about left conservatism. I talk about Marx as a conservative philosopher, right? So in Marxism, there's this notion, right, that the task is not to just interpret the world. This is Marx's famous thesis on Feuerbach. The task is not to just interpret the world, but the task is to change the world. Well, but kind of my experience over my lifetime has been like, I feel kind of my generation has been a failure. And definitely need to do a live stream on Michael Burawoy's Public Sociology. But this is a project, something like back in 2004, Michael Burawoy announced this, like popularization of science, try to teach social theory to the broad public. And I think Burawoy's lectures, which are freely available online, are excellent lectures, but kind of, no, I feel that since 2004 we have become much less informed. And his project of public sociology, like, I don't think it has any fruit. Like, if you go to YouTube and Google public sociology, you're not going to find anything. You're going to find a couple of videos by Michael Burawoy from 2004, and that's not a very reassuring sign. And Burawoy himself, he was a president of American Sociological Association, World Sociological Association, so he was a pretty important person, institutionally speaking. And I feel, again, that it doesn't mean that history is all going to go downhill, but at least in the span of my lifetime, it has been, I feel, very much downhill, unfortunately. Or at least that's, again, tell me I'm just pessimistic temperamentally, but that's the way I remember things. And so I have to fall back on a certain kind of an individual project. So it's like my lectures are not going to save society. So, and I can't, like, if I start with Marx's thesis, like, it's not enough to interpret the world, you have to change it, I'm going to just become terribly depressed and terribly pessimistic, because, like, the left movement in Britain was destroyed, Occupy movement was destroyed in the United States. I think there's a huge kind of rollback. And it's like, in the US, democracy has been undermined for the past 50 years. And right now, people talk about how democracy is under threat, but they mean something completely different. And I feel that the way they try to solve democracy being under threat is just going to simply exacerbate the problem. Because, again, exactly what they're doing is they're trying to cure the symptoms, not the root causes. And the root causes are the neoliberal politics and kind of the way electoral politics are structured. And just in general, even the whole emphasis on electoral politics, because democracy should not be about elections. Read the ancient Greeks, read Rousseau. Democracy is not about elections. Democracy is about constant participation of civil society. People constantly holding government to account. In fact, somebody like Marx or Lenin, or actually Rousseau, would talk about accountability, transparency, rotation, responsibility, how you have elected officials reporting back to the people, and these elected officials not turning into an entrenched caste of technocratic bureaucrats. These elected officials being subject to scrutiny, being subject to straightforward recall, and there's nothing of that. So it's like, as a Marxist, I think American democracy has been very, Wendy Brown makes this point very well. Democracy is always an ideal. So there's never been any place in which was really thoroughly democratic. But even those small gains which existed in the countries of the First World are being rolled back. And, people are going to point to Europe and certain countries in Europe, like the Scandinavian model, which is, I think, perhaps very nice for the individuals, but it's like, in the space of human, like Europe doesn't have a foreign policy. Europe doesn't have a unified foreign policy. No country in Europe has their own independent foreign policy. So it's like European countries are these like enclaves, resorts, like insulated capsules, but they don't represent a kind of stable, self-sustaining solutions to the political problems. If nothing else, because Europe only exists at the mercy of the United States foreign policy and, protected by the United States nuclear shield, and kind of wouldn't exist without it. And the European experiment would be impossible. So in this sense, Europe is not self-sufficient. Like it's not a good model in itself. And the U.S. is in a very sorry state. I've seen some statistics that something close to a third of American teenagers, it was an official CDC statistics, close to a third of American U.S. teenagers contemplated suicide in the year 2021. That's not a sign of a well-functioning society. And that's actually, that statistic prompted me to do this stream and talk about Marx as a conservative. And I hope I'll get to that in a moment. But what I'm saying is that, if the world is going to hell around us, there's always the individual project. And the individual project doesn't have to be asocial. Like it's individual, but it's kind of individual, but not asocial. And I want to point to myself as an example. And I'm not trying to congratulate myself or put myself onto a pedestal. I'm just barely trying to this is the best thing I can think of. I'm not sure how good it is at the end of the day. But not antisocial. So what I'm saying is that I don't think I can be properly human or properly happy unless I engage with my fellow human beings, including with the world at large. And YouTube is a very small window into a world at large, and kind of I have a tiniest number of subscribers, most of whom I would imagine are my former students, for whichever reason, wishing to keep in touch with trying relive the fun memories that we had together in classes, right? So I don't kind of, but still, kind of, if I have these thoughts, I have to share them with other people. And only in dialogue with other people can I develop my own mind. So this is kind of this Aristotelian notion that man is by nature a political animal, zoon politikon. And this is kind of, in general, what I meant to talk about. In a sense that, so the kind of left conservatism, and specifically, perhaps let's talk about Marx, left conservatism. And I would say that Rousseau and Hegel and Marx are all three left-wing conservatism, especially because you can read Hegel in a left-wing fashion, left Hegelians, right? Left conservatism, Marx, right? And the idea is kind of, I would begin by saying that I could be completely wrong, but when I look around, it seems to me that most people are unhappy. Most people are unhappy, and again, I would be ecstatic if I were wrong. I wish I were wrong, but that's at least what it seems to me. And the reason I talk about this in terms of conservatism is because I want to say that kind of within the present scientific model, and I don't see any serious reason to doubt this, the idea is that humans have a nature, which is a controversial and a conservative thing to say. But again, and I stand by it. Marx talks about human nature. Human nature is, for example, social nature. We thrive in social settings, and like in general, the fact that we have to breathe oxygen, the fact that I drink this water and it doesn't poison me, the fact that I take particular, like aspirin and it cures my headache, isn't all this a strong indication that we have a common human nature? And this is sometimes, you have this crazy ideas about completely kind of unhinged notions of relativism that seem to sort of forget, because it's controversial to talk about human. Like, I'm not saying human nature is static and changeless or some kind of ontologically given for all time. I'm not saying that, but there is it's what makes us happy, what makes us function is not arbitrary. And like if you go especially to medical literature, like psychotherapy, psychotherapeutic literature, it's not like anything goes. And like when you look at statistics that a third of American teenagers felt suicidal, like seriously suicidal over the year 2021, kind of that's not just a number that you can discard or wish away, right? There's a reason why statistics works, right? And there's a reason why, I could go on and on and on about this, but like psychotherapy, there are particular, like cognitive behavioral therapies, it's only a tool. I think it has to be supplemented with serious philosophy, but it's a tool that works. And if humans didn't have a nature, then there would be no reason why therapy that works for one person would work for another person. But we have commonality. We have our common humanity. And I could say that, yes, when we talk about human nature, we definitely need to talk about evolution. And kind of, to me, evolutionary thinking is super important. And there are philosophical problems with evolution. Evolution is not absolute. But I think as far as a leading hypothesis, evolution is very robust, right? And perhaps this is a good time to mention this. I always say that I'm a skeptic first, everything else second. Like, I'm a skeptic first, physicalist second, skeptic first, Marxist second. I think that perhaps a better word would be to say I'm a seeker. Seeker, which is the meaning of the ancient Greek word skeptikos. Skeptikos means inquirer, the one who asks questions, right? So in this sense, like, I do build my life on the basis of certain hypotheses, kind of tentative working hypotheses. But I'm always looking for an alternative. So in this sense, I think it's very important to never be dogmatic and never kind of capital B believe in anything. Never hold anything as capital T truth. And in fact, I want to say that and perhaps I'm going to do this in a more systematic fashion, but even within theology, I think that's a very important approach, because like even in theology, if I think in serious theology, right, if you take any statement of religious faith, you take a particular sentence, to just say that this sentence is true with a capital T, that's very presumptuous of the human mind. Human intellect, and I think most religious traditions would recognize this, human intellect is limited, and humans, we are parts of something larger than ourselves, and our language is deeply imperfect. Our intellect is imperfect, our language is imperfect. And so to say that our words, especially describing divinity, are capital T true, I feel that's just blasphemous. So I feel kind of in this sense, skepticism for me is also a religiously pious position. It's a religiously pious position because again, it just shows proper humility, that you understand that your words are imperfect, and whatever the nature of the divinity is, of the divine realm, however you want to phrase that, you shouldn't feel entitled to pronounce prophetic judgments on it. Yes, humility. And I think that's also very conducive to dialogue, especially between students in a cross-cultural, multicultural context, when you have different students coming from different traditions. And like, even if you are anti-ecumenical and you think that kind of most people are wrong and there's one way to be religious, and kind of you don't believe in dialogue, you think most people are wrong, but still you have to have a way to filter out and to find what religious belief is going to suit you consider to be most correct, or you find to be most correct, or you have a reason for asserting that one religious belief is more correct than others, perhaps. But it's like the conviction has to come at the end of the process. You cannot guarantee it in advance, or at least I don't see how you can do that. So humans have a nature. So yes, I'm a seeker in the sense that I take evolution very seriously, and I urge everybody to take evolutionary thinking, including evolutionary psychology, very seriously, but also to take it with a grain of salt, and to always keep an open mind towards alternative possibilities. Although again, like in this apophatic, it's like I've had these discussions about teleology lately. Like I think I'm apophatic even about teleology. Like the reason for my mechanicism is actually my apophatic teleology. Can I explain that in simple terms? So it's like teleology has to do with goals or aims in nature. Does nature have aims intrinsically? And I want to say perhaps yes, perhaps nature has intrinsic aims, but human intellect is limited, and we don't have uncontroversial access to what the aims of nature are. And so we have to be apophatic about them. So perhaps nature has purposes, but we don't know what they are. And it's possible, like just to take, forgive me for these simplified examples, but like if you imagine somebody like, Lovecraft's universe, like with the evil militia, well, I don't think that gods are evil for Cthulhu. They just operate on a transcendent level vis-a-vis ours. And for us, from our limited perspective, their actions seem evil and frightening. But of course, they're the gods. They're the creators of the universe. So it's like they make the rules. So actually, it only seems to us from our limited perspective that their goals are evil, but in fact they're not. Lovecraft, right? So you can have all sorts of teleology. You can have very benign Neoplatonic teleology, like in somebody like Plotinus, or you can have this very ominous and sinister and foreboding teleology, like terrifying, anti-human and radically anti-human teleology, like in Lovecraft. And so, because you cannot choose between the two, I just bracket these out. Like it's like Hobbes's argument for religious toleration. That I don't know. I cannot claim, like, human beings can make mistakes. I can never be sure that I'm not making a mistake. Therefore, I'm never entitled to pronounce my religious judgments as truth with capital T, and therefore I can never kind of impose them on you, right? And so, in this sense, I guess kind of for Hobbes, there's a certain kind of not religious, but kind of methodological atheism. Atheism, like apophatic atheism, like you don't appeal to God to explain things because God is beyond human reason. Like, God can never be a good explanation. Invoking God to explain things is just impious. It's impious and it's sacrilegious, because to explain something earthly with the appeal to divinity, to the kind of fundamental ontological principle of the universe, that's in a sense that's a category mistake, but it's also disrespectful. Right? I have no idea if this was clear, but I tried my best. Anyway, so yeah, I was talking about conservatism and Marx. So most people are unhappy. Humans have a nature, which is a product of evolution, but also a product of biological evolution, of cultural evolution. And I want to say that most people are unhappy is because the environment in which we live is very unconducive to human life. It's very different from the way that we lived as hunter-gatherers. So humans have a nature, and it's a product of biological and cultural evolution, and the biological basis has evolved in us when we were hunter-gatherers. When we lived in small bands, small tribes of people who were mostly related by blood. There was no hierarchy, and people just spent most of the time just foraging for food. But also because you couldn't store food reliably, so anthropologists tell me, it's like this was not actually very onerous. Like the agriculturals, and Rousseau makes this point, and I think that modern anthropology bears this out. The point that Rousseau makes is that agriculture makes life much worse, and there's this. And there's this notion in Marx and in Rousseau that progress, there's actually kind of this technological progress. Human societies become stronger. There's like mobilization, this efficiency for the sake of efficiency, what Herbert Marcuse calls Leistungsprinzip, right? The principle of performance, right? So there's this progress in terms of efficiency for the sake of efficiency, but like in terms of human well-being, there's little progress or no progress or regress, kind of, especially if you think of the horrors of early industrial revolution. Again, so many people live today the horrors of early industrial revolution to this day. Again, I look around this room, and most of the stuff I see around me is made in China, in China, not just China, but places like Thailand or Bangladesh, and people working in conditions which are close to the conditions of early industrial revolution that Marx lamented, right? And so anyway, so there's this efficiency for the sake of efficiency, but not humanism. And there's a whole separate discussion. I don't want to talk about this now, but let me just signal Foucault and disciplinary society. So let's say Foucault on discipline and perhaps Freud on sublimation. That kind of the fundamental experience of us as human beings in the world is of subordination, subjection. We become slaves to society. Society breaks us. And because of this, kind of my own outlook, yes, it's pessimistic, but it's also somewhat individualistic in some important respect. Like, I'm talking to my students as individuals, and I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help them free themselves from kind of all the bad things that society imposes on us when society tries to take control of us. Again, this notion again of efficiency for the sake of efficiency. And this is a very kind of robust project. So, like, people who worried about this alienation, rationalization of this kind of dehumanizing modernity, this is like in most of major thinkers. This is in Tönnies, this is in Weber. Weber calls this disenchantment and rationalization. Heidegger calls this technological understanding of being. Marx calls this alienation, Entfremdung and Entäußerung, alienation and externalization. Durkheim calls this enemy, anomie, the French word anomos, kind of rough etymological translation as lawlessness. But well, it's not lawlessness, it's loss of proper social regulation, right? And so kind of what I'm driving at is that I'm not very successful at giving this as a lecture on the topic of left conservatism and talking about everything at the same time, but perhaps it's more fun this way. But it's like if I were to try to give a proper lecture on this, I would talk about all the conservative elements in Marx, right? And how there are all sorts of ways in which feudalism is actually more humane than capitalism for Marx, and how there are many elements in communism which may or may not appear. And again, like when I talk about conservatism or pessimism, I think that Marx himself was very pessimistic. I don't think that Marx actually, towards the end of his life, kind of my estimation, Marx did not actually believe that revolution is possible. And again, kind of the kind of Marxist I am, very pessimistic. I don't see serious prospects for revolution. And again, it's like, go back to this notion of polyphony for the sake of polyphony. I'm very happy that other people are optimistic, especially my younger students, and I try to keep in touch with some of them, many of them, in order to try to get a jolt of optimism from them. But again, unfortunately, my own temperament is very pessimistic. But what I was driving at is that I feel that there's all sorts of really genuine bona fide conservative points in Marx. Again, like conservative in an Aristotelian sense. Like humans have a nature, we thrive in well-ordered communities, and yes, in principle, kind of, what's the idea of clever conservatism, right? Is that society is made of a combination of elements. Like we are products of biological evolution, cultural evolution, right? And some of our cultural institutions and also biological instincts, if you want, they are adaptive, right? Adaptive. And some cultural institutions are also adaptive, and some are maladaptive. Marcuse says this very explicitly. He talks about, for example, when he talks about repression, he talks about necessary and surplus repression. Necessary and surplus repression. So necessary repression is like in order for me to start this live stream, I had to repress my other desires to eat ice cream or frolic in the street or whatever. Like and again, like this notion of self-discipline, what Nietzsche calls the stage of the camel, or what Hegel calls in the master-slave dialectic the element of the slave, which is the productive element, which is the stoical element for Hegel, right? This notion of self-discipline. Again, as Rousseau says, true freedom is obedience to the law that one has prescribed to oneself. Rousseau says, freedom is obedience to the law that one has prescribed to oneself. So there are constraints, there are repressions which are necessary in order for my body not to disintegrate into a pile of goo. There need to be kind of forceful mechanisms that keep it together in homeostasis, right? But there are also surplus repressions, right? And it is my contention, and it's a strong contention, I could ask this as a question perhaps, I don't know. It's like, again, from what I gather from anthropological literature and social theoretical literature, society, this transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculturals, it's based on loss and on very serious violence. That hunter-gathering lifestyle is profoundly natural to us. Agricultural lifestyle, and of course modern or postmodern, whatever, industrial lifestyle is deeply unnatural to us. And that's why so many people, that's a hypothesis, that would be my hypothesis. So many people are unhappy, deeply unhappy, precisely because we find ourselves in a society which is not very well, structured, modeled, whatever, designed for our needs. It's not kind of, our society is designed for efficiency, not humanism. And kind of we do things such as abolish slavery or give people voting rights or give women voting rights, not in the name of humanism. I don't think that's a good Marxist explanation, but we do this for the sake of efficiency. Again, Foucault in Discipline and Punish, Surveiller et Punir, he talks about how modern ways of punishment, they appear more humane, but their point is not that they're more humane, but that they're more effective, including more cost effective. And, disciplinary power in Foucault is terribly, terribly important and terribly underappreciated idea, but I don't want to talk about everything at the same time. But that, I kind of, let me just point towards it, that the way I see philosophy and the way I think that philosophy is necessary for happiness is because in order to defend ourselves from the coercive and destructive elements, kind of society trying to subdue us in this logical efficiency for the sake of efficiency, the only way how we can do this is we have to engage in critique. And in order to engage in this critique, we need to do kind of proper social theory because we need to understand how to defend ourselves. Sociology or social theory or philosophy as a martial art, as an art of self-defense, and ultimately self-defense for the sake of care of the self. That's Foucault's one of the latest seminars in Collège de France, Hermeneutics of the Subject. Yeah. So, I guess part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about culture wars because I feel that culture wars and identity politics is not a left-wing project, but is actually a very destructive project which seeks to divide and conquer the working class. But I'm not sure if I want to get into that. I'm not even sure if I want to add it to the screen somewhere. Where would I add it? But you kind of a different related topic. The reason again why I'm making this stream is because I'm trying to understand in my own head what is my task, what is my role as a philosopher if I don't believe in positive social change. Like, I think that we can look at this table, we can understand what's going on, and we can try individually to be better people. And this is what I tried to begin with, but wasn't very clear, is that, again, my project, I feel that in order to be happy, properly human and properly happy, I have to engage in practices which at the same time make the world a better place. Just because that's the way the human beings are by nature. That we cannot be happy unless we engage in pro-social tasks. That's my feeling and that's my experience. And that kind of, the whole point of my Coursera was that, again, this is the standard point of the Prject of Enlightenment. The standard point of the Prject of Enlightenment is that in a well-ordered society, and Adam Smith says this, and Rousseau says this, and Hegel says this, and John Stuart Mill says this. So I do want to make this a new slide. So in a well-ordered society, the interests of the individual, there's no difference between altruism and egoism, and the interests of the individual coincide with the interests of society. Altruism is equal to egoism in a well-ordered society. So this is, I would say, the summary of the Prject of Enlightenment, which is not left-wing, which is not right-wing. It's neither left-wing nor right-wing. Like, it's kind of, in order to understand the Prject of Enlightenment, you have to look at both strands. You have to read Burke, conservatives like Burke and Hume, but you also have to read revolutionaries like, well, Rousseau. Rousseau is actually also a conservative if you read him very carefully. So Prject of Enlightenment is not right or left. And in fact, there are different ways of defining what right and left, what these words mean. But I would say that if we define right as conservation, then there's something to be conserved. Kind of, again, like even for kind of a revolutionary like Marcuse, there's something that needs to be conserved. Society is not all bad. There are good things about society to be conserved. And you need to conserve what's good about society. And the left is about critique. It's about critique and challenge. Kind of. Let's say, let me write reform or revolution. So it's not right or left, it's both right and left. The serious Prject of Enlightenment. And in a well-ordered society, partly because of the way humans are, and partly because of the way the society is arranged. Society needs to be, and Adam Smith talks about this. This is what Adam Smith means by the invisible hand. That in a well-ordered society, like, the best way for you to become happy is also the best way for you to contribute to society. And it's like, again, I think there's plenty of examples of that. like in a well-ordered society, altruism is equal to egoism. And think of the example of somebody like Goethe. Goethe is writing poetry, and this is what fulfills Goethe. But at the same time, he's contributing to humanity. So it could be Goethe or Newton, or think of Isaac Newton, or think of Isaac Newton Lewis. Isaac Newton Lewis is an American inventor who also kind of, as far as I remember his biography, was also very charitable with his inventions, like gave away the patents, right? So it's like people who invent, who discover stuff, they don't do it for the money, for their own narrow benefit, but they want to share with the world. Art, and again, like Marx actually talks about this, how in communism, like I give this lecture, or let's say I write an article on Wikipedia, Wikipedia or open source software, Wikipedia, open source. If you write an article on Wikipedia, and I have written articles myself, and I know people who write articles too. And Nikolai, for example, it's like you want everybody to read the article that you have written, right? There's no difference between altruism and egoism. You egoistically write an article because you want to understand something. You want to I'm very unhappy that I used to put materials in closed systems, because now some of the materials are lost. I wish, because the university has never prevented me from doing so. All of my lecture notes, all of my slides, everything I could have put up online in open access. I could have done this. The university has not prevented me from doing that. I'm not sure why I didn't do that. Kind of out of convenience, because we had these systems like, for example, Microsoft Teams, and I would just by default put things there just because it seemed easier. But now later down the line, some of the things are lost because software changes or whatnot. But if everything was an open source, I would have had access to it. And if I write, for example, lecture notes for Marx, let's say, or I write a short summary of Marx's work on Wikipedia, and somebody else can come and improve that, that would be wonderful. If they could proofread, double check what I've written, or just read it themselves, right? I'm so happy if people watch my Coursera. I also feel it's imperfect. I always want to do better. But it's like if anybody finds my lectures useful, I'm very happy for that. And again, the kind of course I try to teach on Coursera, which I think kind of is a course on history of philosophy, beginning with the ancient Greeks, with an understanding and appreciation of serious materialism, of serious physicalism, of Turing's arguments, for computational approach to consciousness, for talk about ancient Greek philosophy with understanding and appreciation of Heidegger and of Foucault. If I knew a course which did those things, I wouldn't have recorded my Coursera. I would have just told students, go watch that. I don't think I'm the best lecturer, but kind of the kind of thing I'm trying to do, I have never seen anywhere else. By the way, I should talk about literature at some point, because I would be more than happy to share my sources. Anyway. So I've been talking for quite a while now. Propaganda. I have this word written down. This is self-defense against propaganda. How do you know that you are speaking and not that your brain has been hijacked by some propaganda machine, by some informational virus, and you're simply repeating somebody else's talking points? Or perhaps, in Foucault reminds us that most insidious power structures are anonymous, so kind of structural forces, not really made by anybody. But Nick Land talks about this accelerationism, how at the end of history it's going to be capitalism and not humanity who is emancipated. Yeah, that's basically a metaphorical way of talking about structural forces. So anyway, I've been talking for quite a while. I think I should take a look at the chat, and perhaps there's going to be some questions. Who knows? And I also want to talk about literature. So let me stop the recording, restart the recording, and greet people in the chat, and then I'll talk about. So. Okay, have not too many people, but that's okay. I'm happy to greet anybody. So we have Felix and Jibasti. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. David Cook and Shania Page, I think. Greetings, colleagues. So Felix says he's met many people who don't really care about humanity. Yes, unfortunately, that's true. And again, this is why I always keep talking about a well-ordered society. Kind of, like upbringing matters. Like we're not, like, I think Protagoras was right. I'm actually uploading my segments about Protagoras from Coursera right now. I think I uploaded another segment yesterday. Human beings are not automatically pro-social. And I think Hobbes is right in this sense as well. Human beings are not automatically cooperative. But in a well-ordered society, in a harmonious society, in a harmonious family, children will grow up to be pro-social individuals. And this will make them happier and society happier at the same time. That's the idea, at least. So Felix, when you say that many people don't care about humanity, yes, it's unfortunate, and I think that's just a testament to the how bad things are. And again, but I'm trying not to be pessimistic about this. I'm trying to say something like, again, I'm meditating on Buddha's approach. Again, if we believe the story, when Buddha first kind of invented or realized the truths, the Four Noble Truths on the Eightfold Path, when he first brought Dharma to humanity, nobody was a Buddhist. I mean, how pessimistic Buddha must have been, right? But it's slow boring of hard words. Langsames Bohren von harten Brettern. But then also you do what's good for you. And like in Buddhism, this is very explicit. You become happy through achievement of enlightenment and nirvana, which is the only true lasting opportunity for happiness. And you, as an enlightened person, you are in a much better position to contribute to society, to be a better human being. And this is very explicit, for example, in Mahayana Buddhism, where people give a vow that they will not escape into nirvana before all sentient beings of the universe are saved. And in a deep sense, for Mahayana, you yourself cannot really become happy unless you make that vow, unless you realize that you are part of something greater than yourself. And the alternative, if you don't do that, you get trapped and lost in the illusion of the ego, and that will make you unhappy. As a matter of kind of practical fact. Matter of fact. And kind of presumably you can even approach this question empirically and run studies and perhaps even do neurophysiology. I'm not necessarily against that. Let me go back to the chat. So Jabasti says, hi, Jabasti. So David Koch, for human development, we need to start. Okay, religion. Religion is a complicated topic. There's a lot of militancy online, and I am, like in general, my apophatic approach would be that most people are misguided, and the truth is more complex than anybody thinks at first sight. And in my experience, a representative atheist is just as misguided and superstitious as a representative religious person. So I used to occupy different positions. Like I used to have different intellectual positions in my past. But I have come to the position that it's best to proceed through an open dialogue, and you can always learn something. And even from kind of more materialistic standpoints, there are reasons to deeply appreciate religious traditions. On the one hand, but on the other hand, like in general, I am in the spirit of this polyphony and openness and kind of militancy. I don't think leads in a good place, and it's like I think kind of, especially if we're playing for the long game, like if we begin with the assertion that vast majority of people are like incurable, that's not a good starting point. Like whenever I talk to my friends, whenever we discuss United States politics, like if you say anybody who votes for a particular party, and there are two in the US, like is not worth talking to, and you're like discounting close to half of active political population, or perhaps which is something like a quarter of total population. I don't think that's a good conversation starter. Like I am for dialogue. We have to talk. Like we have, as humans, we have common challenges. We have I believe we have a common interest, and we should be able to talk to each other. And militancy, I don't think is a good way to proceed. And kind of even I think religious traditions have insights. Religious traditions on their own are not enough, because like if you belong to a particular religious tradition, you need to know why do you belong to this and not to some other. And kind of I don't think that you can again take any religion. Any religion is a minority. It means the vast majority of people born on planet Earth today would not follow your religious conviction. So they either have to have been extraordinarily lucky to be born within your denomination, or they have to do mental work to know that your denomination is actually correct. So, I'm for dialogue. That's my short point. Shania Page. Why hasn't it taken this long for some left conservative thought to be taken seriously? Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure if I have a good answer. I'm afraid, I think like in general, most people are very ill-informed. And that's what, because you're saying that left conservative thought is not taken seriously. And I just want to say, like, from my experience, any serious thought is mostly not taken seriously. So it's like good, correct ways of understanding, like nuanced ways of understanding the world, kind of a little bit conservative, but also a little bit progressive, kind of at the same time, and kind of not reduced to shouting matches or fanaticism. I think fanaticism, and that's why I'm very allergic to identity politics, because it's full of fanaticism and this binary thinking. At the same time, this is part of my pessimism, that I don't kind of human nature. We talk about biology. I think there are strong reasons in biological evolution and in cultural evolution why, like especially when you talk about these maladaptive adaptations. Sorry for the kind of dysfunctional adaptations, maladaptations. Fanaticism is one of them. Like, fanaticism is here to stay. Fanaticism and tribalism are unfortunately here to stay. So, like, to say that, oh, I hate identity politics is cancer, is like saying, it's tragic that we all die. Or that it's, I'm sorry that there's a second law of thermodynamics. Like, it's a fact of life. Something that we have to deal with and take as a given. Take as a known problem. Fanaticism and tribalism, I'm not saying that they're impossible to surmount, but for the foreseeable future, I would imagine that these would remain very strong problems. Are kind of problems that are going to remain with us. Will remain problems for the foreseeable future. For the foreseeable future. Anyway. Okay. Yeah, so identity politics, working class. Yeah, again, in my optimistic moments, I think that, of course, the working class has interests in common and people just have to unite. That was part of my pitch in Coursera. And I don't think, it's like, forget about Marxism. Like, this is the project of democracy. I mean, Marx, even forget the word communism. What Marx says is that up until this point, we have been ruled by blind forces of nature. Like, capitalism has this cursive laws of market competition, and we're ruled by them, right? This is what Marx says. And kind of he imagines the world beyond that, where human beings will be able to rationally to organize their life, including if they really want to rationally organize their life around, the market, the free market. Like, because communism is a free society. Like, if people want to have markets in communism or money in communism or reinstate private property, like, why not? Kind of, if they rationally so decide. Marx thought that they wouldn't, but again, it's up to the people to decide. Because kind of the ultimate point, kind of, for Marx, the political aim is what he calls in his earlier works, true human emancipation. There's this merely formal emancipation is what we have now. We have formal rights, but people are unable, by and large, to enjoy them, even though kind of formally we do have rights. And again, in the 50 years of neoliberalism, rights have been mostly taken away from us, unfortunately. Not necessarily by somebody, but just, I would say, by structural forces. Competition for the sake of competition, efficiency for the sake of efficiency. But yeah, so the goal is kind of real human emancipation, which is some form of democracy, or if you want to talk about Republican tradition, Republican in the sense of Machiavelli or Rousseau, that kind of Republican tradition, yeah, that as well. Rousseau is another deeply pessimistic thinker. I should do more videos on Rousseau. Rousseau is perhaps my most favorite philosopher of all times. And he has been, like, when I was a first-year student, when I only began studying philosophy, after my first year of studying philosophy, I had two favorite thinkers, David Hume and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and still to a large extent, they are my favorite thinkers. My thought has evolved in all sorts of ways, but those two guys are great, still great. Let me talk about literature. I mentioned this last time, but it's like these are. So again, like Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press is what I tend to look for. Routledge tends to be good. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is good. Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, occasionally good. But in terms of books, especially for my Coursera course, the one that I used most was History of Political Thought, or History of Political Theory by George Klosko. I think it's published by Oxford University Press. You can look it up. George Klosko, Oxford University Press. Alan Ryan was not bad. Alex Kalinikas. This is I mentioned this last time. Our official textbook for the social theory course in the University of London. Stephen Smith is not too bad on Yale lectures available. Stephen Smith was very close to what I've been trying to do, but he stops with Tocqueville. So there's no Marx, there's no Weber, there's no Habermas, and Tocqueville is not the most. It doesn't have Hegel, so nobody's perfect. Anyway, so we've been going on for 70 minutes now, which is not bad. So almost a full lecture. So we covered, I think, a lot of grounds. I had a chance to answer some questions, which is nice. So I think we'll probably wrap up here. I'll try to establish a regular streaming schedule. Apologies, people. Life is chaotic. I'm not exactly there yet. I don't want to make promises I'm not going to be able to keep. So, but it's like this is my third stream in 8 days or 10 days, which is not bad by my standard. Anyway, I hope this was fun. I hope this was illuminating. Thank you very much, colleagues, for showing up. I couldn't have done it without you. Again, this is my commitment in my life to the Aristotelian ideal of man, humans by nature being social. Like if I didn't connect to other human beings, including through streams like this, my life would be incomplete. Like I would just not be happy. So anyway, hope you learned something. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Namaste, colleagues.